Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the New Mexico Museum of Art. Can you all hear me? Yes? No? Yes? No? I'll be a little bit louder, but not too loud. My name is Christian Wagesbeck. I'm the curator of 20th century art here at the New Mexico Museum of Art. Oop, maybe it's a little too dark. Rebecca, I think it's a little too dark. Well, in the meantime, I want to welcome you all to this exciting event, and I want to ask, well, I was going to ask for a show of hands, but I couldn't see it. How many of you have been in our St. Francis Auditorium before? That's great. That's what I like to see, almost everybody. For the few of you who this is your first time, welcome. I hope that you're sufficiently enchanted with our beautiful 100-year-old auditorium to keep coming back and visiting the rest of our programming that we have going on. Before we get started, I need to say a few words, and the first words that I have to say are, please take out your cell phones and turn them off. And now just a few acknowledgments. The New Mexico Museum of Art is working in partnership with the School for Advanced Research to present a series of public presentations, beginning with the one today, to honor our shared history. This year marks the centennial celebration of the Museum of Art. Last year marked SAR's 110th anniversary, and this year is the 40th anniversary of the Indian Arts Research Center at SAR. These presentations are supported by the New Mexico Humanities Council, whose mission is to enhance the civic and cultural life of the citizens of New Mexico. The New Mexico Humanities Council encourages and supports the humanities by seeking out and funding quality humanities programs for presentation to and participation by diverse public audiences throughout New Mexico. Thought, learning, and experience must be shared. This is what it means to be human. We are grateful to the New Mexico Humanities Council and its principal funder, the National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as a substantial commitment by the New Mexico Humanities Council Board of Directors. And now a disclaimer. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the New Mexico Endowment for the Humanities or the New Mexico Humanities Council. I need to recognize a few key players in making all of this possible. The New Mexico Humanities Council for providing the grant to help this program, the School for Advanced Research for their partnership and the planning and presentation of this program, including Michael F. Brown, President, Laura Sullivan, and Isis Bennett, the staff of the New Mexico Museum of Art, including Rebecca Aubin, Mary Scully, and Mary Kershaw, our director, and the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs and the Museum Resources Department. Now this program, the themes are all related to the content of our centennial exhibition here at the Museum of Art, Horizons, People and Place in New Mexican Art. And these programs will focus on the shared aspects of Native American art and architecture as seen at both the museum and SAR. But I wanted to be sure to invite everybody, if you haven't already seen Horizons, which is in our historic building right now and will be up through November, to please go and do so. I think you'll really enjoy it. This is a great time to catch it because over the year, significant pieces, including our Pueblo paintings, will be changing out. So this is the last week you can see our first round. And keep coming back because we'll keep having new things for you guys to see. Now, I'd like to introduce Brian Vayo. A member of the Pueblo of Acoma, Brian served as the director of Indian Arts and Research Center at the School for Advanced Research. With 25 years of experience working with tribal groups throughout the Southwest, Brian also served on his own tribal community as lieutenant governor, the director of historic preservation, and the founding director of the Haku Museum. His recent work as an artist experience extends into the field of architecture, planning, and the arts. A painter and potter, Brian enjoys experimentation with natural and recycled materials he discovers on the New Mexico landscape to create mixed media works that celebrate aspects of Acoma culture. Brian indicates that his direct involvement during the early years of NAGPRA influenced his work in both historic and cultural preservation. He attended New Mexico State University, where he studied business administration and marketing, and later studied anthropology at the University of New Mexico. Please, everybody, join me in giving Brian a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Came in from the cold, huh? Welcome to this first presentation as part of this series. We are very, very excited about this partnership, and I want to thank the New Mexico Museum of Arts for this opportunity to engage in this celebration. We're very happy that we can offer some pieces from our collection to the Horizons exhibit, and to also share in the producing this series of lectures. Excuse me. It's my great pleasure this afternoon to introduce our speaker, the first of a select group of presenters who are featured in this series titled Santa Fe's Colorful Legacy. Nancy Owen Lewis, scholar in residence and former director of scholar programs at the School for Advanced Research, is author of the award-winning Chasing the Cure in New Mexico, Tuberculosis and the Quest for Health. Nancy has produced 5 articles on this topic, including High and Dry in New Mexico, Tuberculosis and the Politics of Health, which received the 2013 Gilberto Espinosa Prize for the New Mexico Historical Review. Other publications include A Peculiar Alchemy, A Centennial History of the School for Advanced Research, and also co-authored with Kay Hagan this publication. She currently serves as Vice President of the Historical Society of New Mexico. She is also on the board of the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, a member of the City Public Safety Committee, and a fellow of the Society for Applied Anthropology. She received her doctorate in anthropology from the University of Massachusetts and previously taught at the University of Alabama in Birmingham and the University of Arkansas. Please join me in welcoming Nancy to the stage.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that introduction. And I also wanted to mention that my article that I wrote, it was the 8th in a series of articles commemorating the history of the art museum, and it just came out in El Palacio, and there's some additions on the table. And the only thing I could think about being article number 8 was they came to heal, they stayed to paint. And so there's, please help yourself to those. A century ago, on February 19th, 1918, a crowd gathered at the New Art Museum to hear table folk tales presented by Kenneth Chapman, associate in art at the School of American Research, where the rabbit got a split lip, why does the rabbit jump, and other stories had come from 3 Tewa boys who had illustrated them with vivid paintings which Chapman shared with the audience. The event, hosted as part of the weekly museum night, also included other paintings described as, quote, the finest things as yet done by the San Ildefonso Pueblo at the time. Despite these rave reviews, the Tewa artists are not named, perhaps because museum director Edgar Lee Hewett tended to view this new genre of Pueblo painting more as ethnography than art, and as such to be identified by culture rather than artists. But as I will show, this would soon change. Also featured was an exhibit by Anglo artists, and their names were included. The paintings of Lee Hirsch, Ralph Myers, and Sheldon Parsons also received rave reviews, for as the newspaper reported, they represent everything that is joyful and lovely in New Mexico landscapes, whether it be in the hills, on the plains, in the canyons, or on the highways. As such, they conformed with Hewett's definition of art. Although Hewett instituted an open door policy for the new museum, which allowed any artist working in New Mexico to exhibit in the museum without having to gain the approval of a jury of critics or collectors, he had very definite ideas of what constituted art. Art, he explained, will bring beauty and harmony into the lives of men. Art that does not do that is not art. Ugliness, strife, propaganda, another hateful word, does not belong to the province of art, and so be it. We share a unique and common history. For archaeologist Edgar Lee Hewett was founding director of both the School of American Archaeology, as the School for Advanced Research was first called, and also the New Mexico Museum of Art. But what first brought Hewett to Santa Fe was neither art nor archaeology. As you might suspect, it was tuberculosis. A farm boy from Illinois originally, and a trained educator, he was teaching in Colorado when his wife, Cora, contracted TB. The recommended treatment, and there was no cure at the time, was fresh air, preferably in a high, dry, and sunny climate, resources that New Mexico possessed in abundance, and so he put her in the back of a horse-drawn camp wagon and toured the West. And Santa Fe was probably his favorite place. And when he was here, you could actually book a room at the St. Vincent Sanatorium for $3 a night, whether you were sick or not. And he developed a passion for Southwest archaeology, and he began reading and lecturing on this topic, ended up becoming the first president of New Mexico Normal University, now New Mexico Highlands, where he conducted one of the first field programs in archaeology and became very interested in the preservation of archaeological sites. When his contract was not renewed, he decided to become a professional archaeologist. He enrolled at the University of Geneva to pursue a doctorate and then relocated to Washington, D.C., where his wife, Cora, died. While there, he played a key role in the passage of the 1906 Antiquities Act, and as a result, he came to the attention of the Archaeological Institute of America, which in 1907 appointed him director of its newly established School of American Archaeology. Franz Boas, anthropologist who served on the board, hoped the school would professionalize archaeology, which he said seemed more concerned about collecting artifacts for museums than answering important questions about the development of human society. What he envisioned was a cadre of trained men schooled in rigorous research methods, not public engagement. He also wanted the school in Mexico. Hewett, however, wanted it in Santa Fe, and Alice Cunningham Fletcher, who was chair of the board at the time, supported Hewett, and she was really hard to argue with. And the board agreed, and an added incentive was that the city of Santa Fe really wanted the school. They hoped it would help reverse the economic decline which occurred when the main track of the Santa Fe Railroad bypassed it in 1880. And as an added perk, they offered housing in this building, the Palace of the Governors. Once the location was secured, however, the very first thing Hewett did was establish a museum. In 1909, the territorial legislature granted approval with the understanding that his salary would be paid by the Archaeological Institute of America, and the legislature also approved the use of the Palace of the Governors with the caveat it be restored to its original Spanish colonial architecture, whatever that was. They did provide funding for that project and for maintenance. The board, for the most part, agreed with this. It's not quite like the annual meeting, I think, that we just had, is it, Michael? No, it isn't. The board, for the most part, approved, but Franz Boas did not. And as he explained in his resignation letter, I cannot conscientiously remain with an institution whose prime aim is to cater to the public taste for constant expansion of work without heeding the needs of science. And that is pretty much what Hewett did, actually. Although an archaeologist and educator by profession, he was indeed a promoter, a popularizer, and an institution builder. And art soon became part of the agenda for both the school and the museum. In 1909, he hired Carl Lotavi, a Paris-trained artist from Denver, to produce murals of pre-Columbian ruins in southwestern history for the Palace of the Governors. And he hired artist Kenneth Chapman to serve as secretary and illustrator. And Chapman was one of a number of artists, who included Carlos Vieira, who originally came to heal, but who stayed to paint, due in no small part to the fact that Hewett offered them all studio space in the Palace of the Governors, exhibited their work, and offered them jobs. And he recruited other artists as well. And as Hewett explained in his annual report to the school, the artists who are painting here are just as truly researchers as are the scientists. They are seeking new truths, experimenting in human expression, offering new opinions, testing new evidences, and recording cultural advancement. So what does this have to do with archaeology? Well, he had an explanation for that as well. He said, "We find that from the peoples of the past, it is mainly their fine arts that have survived. Art is the great, lasting, self-revealing activity of life. Through it, we transmit our spiritual power through the ages." And he encountered these traditions during his archaeological excavations at Puye and El Rito de los Frijoles, or Bandelier, where he conducted his first field school. But he soon made another discovery, that the Tewa workers he hired to assist on these excavations included very talented artists as well. And as noted in the school's 1908-09 annual report, these excavations were directed by Hewett with an excavating force of 20 Tewa Indians from the adjacent valley. In Alice Marriott's biography, Maria Martinez describes how her husband Julian came to be hired. The 8th day after my daughter was born, Julian came home in the evening laughing and excited. Something new was happening. He said, "Some white men came to see the governor today. They say they're teachers, and they're wanting to study up on the Pajarito Plateau. They want to go to that old village at Puye Canyon, where San Ildefonso came from, and study there." And Julian, indeed, would be one of the first men to be hired. Julian wanted me to go up to the plateau with him, explained Maria, but I refused because there are too many strangers there and the baby is too little. But the baby died, and so she joined them the following year. And this biography goes on to tell how Hewett showed Maria a piece of pottery, asked if she could reproduce it and if Julian could decorate it. And that's a whole nother story. But the Pueblo workers became familiar with rock engravings, paintings in cave rooms, polychrome murals found at these sites. And during one excavation, archaeologists discovered the painting of a Navanyu, or water snake, in a cave, and asked Julian if he could copy it. And although paintings on ceramics, walls, hides have a long tradition in Pueblo culture and are used for ceremonial purposes, painting on paper was really new. And this painting, and the paintings that I'm going to be talking about, including this one, many of them are in the Indian Arts Research collection at SAR. And other workers, such as Alfredo Montoya, also showed talent and would go, and they would also go on to become well-known artists. But it is Crescencio Martinez who is credited with elevating Pueblo easel painting to an art form. And he was the first to display conspicuous ability in true Indian art, wrote Hewett in an article published in Art and Archaeology. He and his staff had been impressed with his skill in decorating pottery, and when a mountain lion fresco was discovered in 1915 on the Pajarito Plateau, the archaeologists in charge asked him to record the mural. And then one day, Crescencio announced that he could paint the costume figures of the ceremonial dances, which is not anything he had really done before. And Hewett at once commissioned him to do so because he believed that the paintings could help him interpret the sites he was excavating. As he explained, the cultural remains derived by the excavation of ancient ruins must be interpreted through knowledge of the mode of life, social organization, ceremonies, rituals, and traditions of living tribes. In other words, he viewed art as something that could help. It's part of ethnographic analogy, as it was called. And Crescencio ultimately produced 50 images. And by 1917, he was selling paintings in Santa Fe, and Hewett was very excited about these paintings because he said, quote, "The work of these young Pueblo artists reveal that innumerable dances are known to the people, even if they haven't been performed in years." In fact, Hewett's ultimate goal extended way beyond archaeology. He wanted to revive these dances. He said, "I want to revive as many of these as possible, not merely because of their ethnological interest, but on account of their great value as aesthetic achievements." And he was deeply concerned about the impact of assimilation policies by the government. And as he explained, no race is doomed so long as its culture lives. When that is destroyed utterly, the soul of the people is dead, degradation through loss of self-respect is inevitable, and the race is beyond hope. Crescencio Martinez was assisted by his young nephew, Alfonso Roybal. Awatsira, as he was known, had already been exposed to painting while a young student at the San Ildefonso Day School. Esther Hoyt, a teacher at the school, had given her young students paper and watercolors and encouraged them to paint pictures of ceremonials. And Awatsira and his uncle received further encouragement from Kenneth Chapman, who worked for the school, and he encouraged Hewett to provide Martinez and Awatsira with materials and workspace. But then at the age of 38, Crescencio Martinez died of pneumonia, and the torch passed to Awatsira and his contemporaries, who, notes Jerry Brody, took modern Pueblo painting to new levels of complexity and diversity. These paintings, note Bruce Bernstein, though made to sell, were strong visual records of Tewa cosmology, and as such can be considered a profoundly indigenous art form. However, in order for their work to be recognized more broadly, for it to move beyond the realm of just ethnography, they needed to be promoted. And artist William Penhallow Henderson and his wife, poet Alice Corbin Henderson, who came to Santa Fe in 1916, became Awatsira's first major patron. And then he was later supported by Elizabeth White, who probably owned this painting of the corn dance, now in SAR's collection, when she opened her Indian art gallery in New York called Ishagu in 1922. Okwa P, or Abel Sanchez, depicted here in a thunder costume outside of the Palace of the Governors in 1919, was a contemporary of Awatsira and also a former pupil of Esther Hoyt in the San Ildefonso Day School. And not much is known about his art until 1919, when poet Alice Corbin Henderson acquired one of his paintings for her friend, writer Mary Austin. And Elizabeth White also sold his paintings in New York, but kept some, such as this one, Koshari Climbing Pole, in her personal collection. But just as Hewett's initial encouragement of Pueblo paintings gave birth to a new genre of art, his invitation to Anglo artists ultimately gave rise to an art museum. During the early 1900s, he continued to recruit prominent artists, offering them studio space in the palace and exhibits of their work, and in turn they would donate paintings. But within 5 or 6 years, the palace was running out of room. What was needed, and the board agreed, was a separate art museum, for as he hinted in his 1914 annual report, quote, "Non-progressive is the state or large city these days that does not possess an art museum or art gallery of some kind open to the public. We need to get one of these." So in March 1915, the New Mexico legislature appropriated $30,000 to construct an art museum. Board member Frank Springer contributed the required $30,000 match. The Santa Fe School Board of Education deeded the land. And a discussion of its design and architecture will be provided by Christine Mather on July 1st in her presentation on Spanish Pueblo Revival architecture. But interestingly, in 1917, as this museum is under construction, the School of American Archaeology decides to change its name to the School of American Research to, quote, "better reflect a mission that also embraced ethnology, linguistics, and art. In fact, the entire group of subjects that proceed from the study of man." The new art museum opened November 25th, 1917, and some 1,200 people crowded into the St. Francis Auditorium to hear the speeches and enjoy the performance by composer Charles Wakefield Cadman and Chanina, a professionally trained Cherokee Creek singer who Hewett had met at the Panama, California exhibition in San Diego. And she describes this event as follows. "Many Indians from the different pueblos came to the concert in their colorful costumes, making a bright splash in the auditorium. Not only did they come to hear Mr. Cadman and me, but also to pay tribute to Dr. Hewett out of love and respect for him and his noble kinship with him." And we'll talk more about that later. Now, this inaugural art exhibit featured 172 paintings by 40 southwestern artists. And there were plenty of images of Pueblo Indians, including Gerald Cassidy's figure of a Taos man, Cui Bono, on display here, which you can currently see in the exhibit. But there were no paintings by Pueblo artists themselves. And as Joe Traggett points out, it appears that Hewett considered Pueblo watercolors to be visual anthropology rather than art. But this was about to change. In March 1919, the Art Museum hosted what is considered to be the world's first exhibition of Pueblo watercolors. The exhibit was organized by Elizabeth D. Huff, who is wife of the superintendent of the Santa Fe Indian School. And in this atmosphere of assimilation, Elizabeth D. Huff was also concerned about their cultural survival. And so, kind of against policy, she brought 7 students to her house, provided them with supplies, and encouraged them to make 2-dimensional pictures of traditional and ceremonial subjects. And these students include Velino Herrera, Fred Kabotie, and Otis Polilonoma, who would all become well-known artists. And Fred Kabotie welcomed this opportunity. He said, when you're so remote from your own people, you get lonesome. You don't paint what's around you, you paint what's in your mind. Loneliness moves you to express something of your home, your background. And so in 1919, she arranged with Hewett to exhibit their watercolors at the Art Museum. And art historian Bess Murphy referred to it as a defining moment that helped revolutionize American modernism. Dance and ceremonial paintings, and dance and ceremonial drawings, as the exhibit was called, delighted the art colony, including Taos newcomer Mabel Dodge, not quite Lujan yet. And she purchased every single painting in the show. And as she explained, if Pueblo watercolors are to have any effect on influencing American art, they have to be seen in the great urban centers where the American aesthetic is forged. And so she sent the pictures back east with a collection of Santos where they circulated among several galleries. Then artist John Sloan recently arrived in Santa Fe, arranged to have Pueblo paintings from the museum's collection, including work by Awad Sira, included in the 1920 Society of Independent Artists exhibit in New York. And these events were really a turning point, because starting in 1920, the museum held multiple exhibitions of Indian art each year, many devoted to Pueblo paintings, including alcove exhibits of student watercolors. But unlike the Anglo artists who could sign up and receive an open gallery space, the shows of Pueblo artists were orchestrated by Hewett and their Anglo patrons. And this was true of the Southwest Indian Affair. In 1922, SAR, in conjunction with the Santa Fe Chamber of Commerce, organized the first Southwest Indian Affair and Industrial Arts and Crafts exhibition, which is the precursor of our Indian market. And it was held September 4th through 6th during Fiesta, an event that Hewett had also helped revive several years earlier. It was held in the old National Guard Army on Washington Street, located behind the Palace of the Governors, where the New History Museum is now. And Hewett and staff member Kenneth Chapman initiated the event to encourage local artists to return to traditional arts and crafts, and also by providing a marketplace for their work. As Kenneth Chapman pointed out, the annual sale of farm products for the entire Pueblo of San Ildefonso did not exceed $4,300, yet one San Ildefonso pottery maker is capable of earning $300 a month, and they were eager to support them. The first fair featured a display of 3,500 pieces of pottery, textiles, paintings, and other art. The Anglo organizers handled all sales and awarded over $1,000 in cash prizes for the best art, as determined by a panel of non-Indian judges. Judges such as Kenneth Chapman and Carlos Vieira examined each piece to determine if it was strictly Indian in form, material, and decoration. The Indians themselves were not present. All sales were negotiated and handled by the Anglo organizers. Winners included Maria and Julian Martinez, who won $5 for their black-on-black pottery, and Fred Kabotie, who won $5, and Velino Herrera, $3 for their painting. Now, Hewett had actually been working with these two artists. For 1920, he had hired Fred Kabotie, Hopi, Velino Herrera from Zia, and Awat from San Ildefonso in order to give them, quote, special encouragement to keep painting. Hewett gave them studio space in the palace, encouraged them to paint 2 to 3 hours a day, and, quote, protected them from enthusiastic friends who would send them off to art schools. And about 25 paintings were done during this time, and their work also includes 2 dancers and a drummer by Fred Kabotie, originally purchased by Mary Cabot Wheelwright, and Hunting Bison on Horseback by Velino Herrera. And another painting by Velino Herrera is currently being shown in the Art Museum here, so I hope you have a chance to see that as well. And Hewett sponsored other artists, such as Tonita Pena, who had also been taught by Esther Hoyt at the San Ildefonso Day School. And she later moved to Cochiti, and she introduced herself to Hewett as a person who could paint pictures like those you showed in that 1919 exhibition. And so Hewett sponsored her for several years and then signed Kenneth Chapman to work with her. And by 1925, Elizabeth White was a major supporter and was showing her work in her gallery in New York. And a painting by her, bow and arrow ceremony at Cochiti, is currently on display here, another painting to take a look at. But, as I'm going through this, I thought, what did these native artists and the Pueblo people in general think of Hewett? And letters in our archives attest to the deep friendship that he had with people such as Santiago Naranjo of Santa Clara Pueblo, Jesus Baca, and others. But the most effusive description of his relationship with Native peoples was provided by Chanina, the Cherokee Creek singer who had sung at the opening of the Art Museum. She became a close friend of Hewett. In 1933, she joined the school's board of managers, and for the next 30 years worked with its members to improve Indian education. In her memoirs, Where Trails Have Led Me, she writes, he has been tireless in his efforts to promote the welfare of the living Indians and help the world to gain a correct understanding of their ancestors. It is small wonder that these people of the Southwest loved and adored Edgar Lee Hewett, who defended their innermost secrets and safeguarded their rituals. Their response to his name was "Him Old Ruin." It was a term of endearment, for they loved old ruins. Hence the title. Now, for those who actually worked for him, there must have been some very challenging moments. Fred Kabotie related the following story of his experience in the summer of 1922 when he and Awat Sira and Velino Herrera were still working for Hewett at SAR, and this appears in El Palacio. And he says, Dr. Hewett asked me, well, he didn't ask me actually, he had already made plans for me to go with him out to Jemez Springs, which is 12 miles up the canyon from Jemez Pueblo, where he was doing an archaeological dig. He said he would like to have Velino Herrera and Awat Sira along to work as laborers, but there were only 2 cars, and the staff and the staff would use those cars, and the three of us would have to use our bicycles. And I said, we could do that, which pleased Dr. Hewett. And so 3 miles past the Indian school, Valino's pedal breaks, and we left him pushing his bicycle, hoping he'd get a ride. The other two were bicycling down La Bajada when Fred Kabotie's lunch burst open and falls out and is now covered with dust. Awasira must have something to eat, he writes, which he did. He had a half a loaf of bread and no water, but that's what they had. And they had just passed Santo Domingo trading post when a car passed. And in it was Valino Herrera, who waves to them as Fred Kabotie and Awasira keep pedaling. And Awasira is now having a great deal of difficulty with his bike. Well, it's pretty late at night when they get to Bernalillo, and Valina is already there, and he has a room. Hewett has given them some money for food and expenses, so they stay with him. And the next day, Valino is planning to take the bus to Jemez because his bike is broken. But it's discovered somehow that he has a gun, and he ends up in jail. When Fred Kabotie learns of this, and Fred is trying to repair his bike, but that's not working, he goes to the jail, and the authorities there say, do you have a gun? And he said, oh yeah, we all have pistols, because we're planning to go rabbit hunting. And so they're all taken into custody. And they end up at court, where they use the money Hewett has given them for expenses to pay their fines. Fred Kabotie has just enough money to buy a loaf of bread and a can of peaches, which they share for lunch. And as soon as they finish, Dr. Hewett and his party drive by. And they kind of explain what happens, and he gives rides to Valino and Awasira, whose bicycles aren't in good shape, but Fred Kabotie keeps pedaling, and he finally arrives the next day in Jemez. And he describes the site. He says, there's a big church ruin, and that is the one we're going to clear. And the next day we went up there, Valino, Awasira, and I. We were the laborers. Sam Huddleston was our foreman. Dr. Hewett was the head man. And then they decided they needed more help. So Sam Huddleston came to me and asked if I could go down on my bicycle to Jemez Pueblo to find some men. It was the only bicycle in working condition, I guess. To find some men so they could come up and work. I was willing to do this, but my rear tire was leaking. So Sam Huddleston had a good idea. He went into the tent and brought out a whole gallon of what turned out to be syrup and poured it until it filled up my tire. I coasted down to Jemez Pueblo and recruited 7 or 8 men to come up to work, but that syrup kept oozing out, and it covered the wheel every time I would stop, and the flies would swarm. Well, we worked there for the whole summer, and then we came back home to Santa Fe. I don't remember whether we brought my bicycle back, but we probably brought the syrup, and hopefully he got a ride. Now, all of these, 3 of these young men had talent and perseverance to become prominent artists and recognized widely by their names. All 3 continued to paint pictures of ceremonials, and Hewett continued to express grave concern about the survival of these rituals, because in 1923, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had issued a circular restricting Indian dances to once a month per village and limiting participation to Indians over 50 years of age. Commissioner Charles Burke urged tribal leaders to, quote, give up these useless and harmful performances of your own free will. If not, some other course will have to be taken. So Hewett is now in charge pretty much of the Santa Fe Fiesta, and he gets an idea. Why not include Indian dances as part of the festivities as a way to keep them going, being practiced, until this policy could be overturned. And it was overturned eventually. And so Hewett goes to the BIA and requests permission to host dances during Fiesta as part of its, quote, educational and historical entertainment. And they agreed, as long as it's just educational. And a wooden platform stage is set up on the plaza in front of the Palace of the Governors, which served as the main performance space for Indian dances. And as board member Paul F. Walter explained, this was the first time that a real effort was made to lay the foundation for a consistent conservation of the splendid Pueblo ceremonials and religious dramas. That this was accomplished is the most important result of the Fiesta, which is certainly not what the original intention of Fiesta, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In 1925, Hewett moved the start date of Fiesta from September to August 4th so that people could attend the Green Corn Dance at Santo Domingo, Pueblo. Then, in 1926, he constructed an open-air Indian theater on the north edge of town to showcase Pueblo dances and professional performers such as Chanina and Ashkenatan, who was a professional Mohawk singer. Now, Fiesta still commemorated the reconquest by General Don Diego de Vargas following the 1680 Pueblo revolt, but by this time local Hispanics had pretty much stopped participating in the event, and Anglos had to be recruited to play the part of de Vargas. Now, the art colony was absolutely appalled. They deplored Hewett's emphasis on Indian culture at what should have been a, quote, Spanish-American folk festival. They hated the fact that he had employed a professional consultant to direct the historical pageant, that he hired professional entertainers, and charged admission to an event that seemed more geared towards tourists than locals. Witter Binner, poet, active member of the colony, wanted Hewett removed as director of the museum and used that demand as his platform in an unsuccessful bid for the state legislature. The Fiesta this year was simply ghastly, wrote Mary Austin in a letter to writer Ina Sizer Cassidy. What everybody is saying now is that before Santa Fe can hope to recover from it, there will have to be a hanging, meaning, of course, our friend at the museum. And if you think of how much he supported artists in the beginning, by the 1920s, his relationship with them has definitely changed. And by this time, a new organization, the Indian Arts Fund, has assumed the role of collecting, preserving, and promoting Southwest art. Incorporated in 1925, its members included Kenneth Chapman and other members of the art colony, and Bruce Bernstein and his panel on pottery will be talking more about that on April 7th. Hewett was not involved in this organization. But interestingly, ultimately, it would be deeded to SAR, where it forms the basis of our collection at the Indian Arts Research Center. Well, if the artists had had enough by 1926, so had Hewett. And he turned his attention once again to archaeology. And in 1927, he established the anthropology department at UNM, and shortly afterwards implemented field schools at both Jemez and Chaco Canyon. But as anthropologist Franz Boas had predicted back in 1907, Hewett indeed was more promoter and institution builder than he was scientist. He trained students and he excavated sites. He trained the first generation of Southwest archaeologists who quietly distanced themselves and got additional training elsewhere. But instead of carefully written site reports and scientific studies, if you look at his publications, they're very much aimed at a popular audience. But he left us with an incredible legacy of institutions and also helped develop a new genre of Pueblo art. And among the artists he encouraged to paint was Awit Sira, whose painting of two deer is currently on display here. So if you haven't seen it or would like to see it again, this is a great time to do so. But I also want to mention that in the museum's courtyard, there are two memorial plaques, one for Edgar Lee Hewett and the other for Alice Cunningham Fletcher, whose vision and determination ultimately gave Santa Fe an incredible research institution and two wonderful museums. Thank you.